All right, what's up everyone? Time for a little Rayburn juice. As y'all know, I always make these juice videos after the tournament, and I just try to pick up on things that are important. Some things aren't important, some things are. This was one of those tournaments where I kind of figured it out during the tournament again. It seems like every one of these tournaments is like that. I wish for once that I could find a spot in practice and then pull up there in the tournament and catch them off that spot. It seems like a lot of guys did that. It never seems like I do that. I don't know why, but I think that that's more real. I think that that happens to more guys than not. So that's what I want to talk about, kind of talk about that, and then why or how you adjust to it. You know, I think that's the key. If it happens so much to all of us, and it happens to me so much, I've always I'm ready to abandon stuff. I'm ready to go try different things. And so that's what happened. So let's dive on in. Real quick, I wanted to throw this in there. I've done a couple swim jig videos, okay? Y'all need to go watch some of them. I'm going to do another one after this video because it's gonna be different. The other swim jig videos I've done, one I did with Wired to Fish, and then another one I did, if you look on my last videos, it's called the One Rod Challenge. And I literally picked up a swim jig in the fall and went to a local lake. And it was a two-part series. I made it two-part because there were so many fish catches and how it changed. And what I did in that video, I picked up a swim jig and never put it down. And I fished it differently all throughout the day. And I ended up figuring them out, like some pretty big ones, late in the day. And I probably wouldn't have thrown it that way. I probably wouldn't have tried it the way I did because it was okay at first. And I was catching fish, but I wasn't catching any giants. And all of a sudden I started catching giants. And like I said, it's a great way to learn a bait. And so check out that video. It will help on fishing swim jigs. It's incredible. Go check that out, guys. It's called the One Rod Challenge, and it's a two-part series. Anyways, I'll leave the link up right here. Go check it out. If you notice, you have to go back and watch my practice videos. You have to practice videos, and then the tournament. You have to listen to those before you really understand the juice video. So we're gonna start in practice. If you watch, I went out there probably 2 weeks, 10 days before the tournament. And I did that on purpose. I wanted to go out there and get a feel of what the lake was doing. I wanted to go try some new areas and some new things that I never usually do in April. In my head, I thought I was going to probably sight fish some, and then from there, I knew I wouldn't be able to sight fish the whole tournament, but I figured I could find some sight fish and then do some other things. And I was hoping if I sight fished, I would have a giant bag one of those days, and then I would just have to make sure I had enough fish to carry me through. Of course, I never called it fish sight fishing. So even after the first day out there of practice, I got out there and I just went and kind of fished places that I normally don't fish in April. As that's going on, what I realized is, like the first bite I threw up there, and it was on my popping perch. And it was just a swirl. Didn't think much about it. Tried some other things in there. Picked up a wacky rig, threw in there and caught it. Wasn't a big one, but I didn't get any more bites. Went to another place, caught some on a thunder cricket, but I was having some follow it. I wasn't getting as many bites as I thought I should. And it was a really good day. It felt good. Everything seemed normal. The water was kind of cold, in the 60s still, and we're talking late April. So as the day's going on, I kind of just I see this one more fish follow my thunder cricket out of a bush. It was like a 3 or 4 pounder. It was the biggest fish I'd seen all day. So I started just throwing a wacky rig around and started catching some. And I'm like, man, there's a lot of fish that I'm bypassing. They're just not wanting to chase anything. So 2 days later, I go back out there again, same thing. I mean, I cannot hardly get bit on a moving bait. I went back down to the mid-lake area, and it was just bad. It was just bad. And I was like, I couldn't catch a fish over 2.5 pounds. And I'm going, this is going to be a tough event. Well, that was 7 days before the event. I took off the weekend because I didn't want to be out there with all the tournaments going on and everyone around. So I start fishing again come Sunday. Well, I go out there Sunday and it gets a little bit better, and Monday and Tuesday, and remember our tournament started on a Wednesday, so a day earlier. But as Sunday rolled around, I went sight fishing Sunday. So I went I went to any place that I thought I could get some clear water and sight fish, and I didn't see any. I saw fish. I never saw fish on a bed. I saw plenty of fish up there. It was confusing too, because I almost saw no fry. I saw what looked like older beds, but the lake had kind of come up a little bit while all that was going on. So I was seeing some really deep beds, but no fish were on them. I later heard that some guys saw fish on beds, and man, listen, I don't know what to make of all that. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. The guys that I knew that went looking, like the guys that I trust, the guys that actually really catch them in tournaments, none of those guys really saw any fish on beds. So I kind of trusted them more than the other people, because people were asking me like, hey, have you seen any? And I'm like, no, and I don't think people believe me. So I knew that was out of the question. So I kind of wasted my whole day Sunday, so I only had 2 more days. Well, as Monday got along, I went fishing and we caught some fish, but it was all still just random. And here's what I want to explain about this. I can sometimes go out there and catch fish on Rayburn doing something, but I don't think it's something that's going to hold up over a multi-day event, so I don't go do it. There's other things that I'm like, this might work today. Like say you go out there and it's really cloudy and you catch them all on a top water, and the next 3 or 4 days it's all going to be sunny, and now you don't think you're going to catch them on top water. Sometimes I don't do that because I'm like, it's worthless to me. So there's certain things in practice I don't go do because I know it's never held up in the past, right? Whether it be a technique, whether it be an area. There's tons of places on that lake that are great to fish Monday and Tuesday, but as you get closer to the weekend and pressure gets to it, they become horrible. That's just local knowledge. That's something that I understand about Rayburn. I'm not always right, but most of the time I will say I'm right. So I don't fish certain areas because that, and a lot of people will tell me, oh man, it was awesome, I went over here today, and I'm like, all right, but be ready for tournament time, because it usually doesn't work out that way. So I still kind of look for areas off by myself that not a lot of people are around, obscure things. Sometimes I look for areas with a lot of fish. Sometimes I look for areas with not a lot of fish because I don't think they'll get hit very hard, and I'm only looking to catch 1 or 2 in there. So I was kind of doing that, and I couldn't really get comfortable. I couldn't figure out what it was that I thought I could go catch them consistently on. I also look for certain bites more than others, and I was trying to figure out something that made sense to me, and although I would get bit here and there, nothing made sense. So fast forward, we caught some fish Tuesday. Wednesday rolls around. I'm kind of just out there winging it. I really don't know at this point what I'm gonna do. I know I have a plan, but it's very iffy. I'm not excited about it. Well, I go up to this one area, and I'm gonna fish it a certain way. I can't even remember what I was doing. It was real calm and clear. And as I push up into this area, I look down and there's a bed there, like a new bed, and it was really shallow. So it was a new fresh fish. And I'm like, oh man, did I miss it? Did I miss the sight fishing thing? And so I turn around and I start fishing around that area, and I see like a little swirl out there. I'm like, that's weird. So I kind of start fishing around there with the top water, and I have one bite it. And then all of a sudden I kind of see some shad flickering out there, and like some old, and this is in the middle of the day, guys, so this is like some old shad spawn deal. So I throw over there with a popping perch and get bit. And I'm like, okay, well, what's going on over here, you know? So I start fishing around, and I start throwing the popping perch, and I don't really like frog fishing like this. It's too random. It's too, I like frog fish when I know where I'm gonna get bit. This is like, I could make a cast out there, I can get bit at the end or the beginning of the cast. I have no clue, and I hate fishing that way. So I just start fishing that way because at this point I have nothing else to do. And I'm literally, after about an hour, I'm like, I'm done. Like, this is why I don't do this. And all of a sudden I had a bite. It was a big one. And I set the hook. If you see, it was like a 4-pounder. And man, my head's starting to like, okay, wait a minute, this fish bit hard. Like it exploded on it. Like it bit the right way. This is interesting to me. So I keep on fishing, and I go another 30 minutes, I finally get another bite. And it's not even in the same place. It didn't act the same, but it's another bite. And I keep doing this and keep doing this. I start kind of putting together a little strategy of, I can get bit on this. It's not how I like to do it, but it is something I want to go do. And I didn't have anything really big, but I just had a feeling, hey, if I did it long enough, I will catch a big one. So I'm pretty excited to go out there. Well, day one shows up, and as I go out there, I go do all the things that I had kind of done previously the days before. So I go fish the hydrilla, never get a bite. I luckily had found some deep fish, like I call them save me fish. They were 14 inchers, didn't think much about them. And I don't have a fish in the first 2 hours, and I go to them. And I thought I could catch a limit off a couple of these places, and I couldn't even do that. So I ended up catching 4 off 2 of the places, and it took me a long time to catch those 4. So I was like, you know what? Let's just go put your head down. You got 4. Let's go see if you can catch. Dude, I was trying to catch 1 or 2, 3 fish doing this. So I go start frogging around, but the problem is it's blowing like crazy, and it's white capping everywhere I kind of want to do it. The main spot that I wanted to start on, it's really white capping in there. So I tried to throw it for like, I didn't even make like 15 casts. And I'm like, this is stupid. I had gone and thrown a 1/4 ounce swim jig. I'd rigged up a white 1/4 ounce swim jig, and I'd thrown it up north a week earlier, just trying to figure something out. And I just still had it. I hadn't messed with it. It was in my raw locker, and I was like, man, maybe they'll eat this thing out here in this wind. I pick it up, start making a couple casts with it, and all of a sudden I get bit on it, and I didn't even realize it was a fish. Like I was throwing it up over some hay and stuff, and it kind of gets hung up, and I kind of pull on it, and it starts pulling back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a fish. So I really didn't throw it back out there, and one eat, I see it swirl on it, I catch it, it's like a 4.5, and I'm like, I mean, like light bulbs start going off. I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I can catch them this way? Like, are you kidding me? So I end up started to do that. I started to catch some fish, and then I just started going where I had gotten some of those frog bites. Now I was still trying to throw a frog, and when it got calm I would throw one. Now I had 5 bites that day on a popping perch. Every one of them missed it. 2 of them were giants, and I was going, but they didn't bite it the same. It was really strange. It was a really weird deal, because the day before I had none of them miss it. But I still I would go back and forth between the frog and the swim jig. I was keeping the frog honest. Well, the next thing you know, the swim jig started. I started catching them, and it was good. And then my coingler catches big bass of day 1. For all you coinglers out there that wonder about if any coinglers catching behind me, yeah, my coingler had big bass of day 1, which is important. And he caught it on a swim jig, the exact same thing I was throwing. So I had 17.5 pounds, but I could have had when I say I could have had a bigger bag, I still had in my boat a big fish with me doing the same thing. So I'm like, hey, it'll catch a big one. And I had caught 2 4.5s that day, and at the time, hey, it put me in 6th place. Those are pretty big ones in my opinion. What I wanted to really get into is just those little subtle changes in one bait in the same area made all the difference in the world. Like, they would come eat that in the wind when they wouldn't eat a topwater or a frog. Now, I bring up the 1/4 ounce swim jig, and I was throwing it on fluorocarbon. I was missing a couple fish. I think I missed 2 fish that day. I'm a guy who doesn't want to miss any fish, ever. Let me explain what I call missing a fish. There's a fish missing a frog where it blows up on a frog and you do nothing wrong and it misses it, right? Then there's times where it eats a frog, you set the hook, and you lose it, right? Not losing it while you're fighting it, but you set the hook and you lose it. Same thing with swim jig fish. There's times when they boil on it or do whatever and they miss your swim jig. There's other times they hit it, you set the hook for just a second, and they come off. That's you kind of missing it. And usually, if that's going on, that is something you're doing is wrong. And it might not be what you're physically doing, but something's wrong with your bait, your line, your rod, something's up. So I don't like to lose those. I don't think those were fish I should have lost. So that night, I totally changed my game plan. I'm gonna go start over here on these shad spawn fish. I'm gonna rig up 2 swim jigs, 1 with braid. I put a heavier white swim jig on there, 3/8 ounce on braid. I did that for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to try something on braid in case I got around some thick stuff, and I was just gonna try a heavier swim jig. I remember the day before throwing that 1/4 ounce. It was blowing so bad I was having a hard time casting it in specific spots, in between bushes and places like that, because the wind was carrying it. And I just wanted 2 of them rigged up. what I instantly noticed is that morning, and I talked about this, about like the confusion of they were busting and everything. I just reached down there and grabbed the one swim jig because they looked alike with braid on there. Didn't realize it until I like caught one, because it was like first cast on that. And I was like, oh, that was on the braid one. I was like, that felt pretty good. And so I started throwing that more and more. Now, I bring that up because I never missed one on day 2 or day 3, which means when I stuck one, I caught every single one of them from there on out. So that was a small adjustment that I made, not necessarily on purpose, but it did work out. It kind of opens your eyes to, like, you know, that's something different. You know, I had rigged up a caffeine shad and some other things to try on the shad spawn and caught them on it. Now, I bring this up and it's perfect timing. So they're just having, while I'm recording this, they're just getting done with the Bass Elite on Neely Henry. And if you see Swindle, I didn't get to watch much of it because I was fishing, but I did watch one little clip about Swindle talking about fishing a composite rod for a swim jig. And he was talking about, he had braid on there, I'm pretty sure, and he was talking about how the composite rod was better, how he wasn't losing anything, and it was a better rod for him to use, okay? And he's right, to a degree. So everyone, when they come down to Rayburn, all my buddies, and I fish with some guys that are not from Texas. I fish with a lot of guys that fish MLF and elite guys and everything, and they always come down to Texas, and they're always like, or they always get around in my boat and they're like, God, you fish with such heavy rods, heavy stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, here's why. They're on Neely Henry, and so pay attention to this if you want to go watch some of these clips. Watch Gerald Swindle. He's throwing at water willow. In the times I saw him throw at the water willow, he's throwing at little stalks, the outside edge of it, and he's working the very outside edge. So when they eat it, it's just almost open water when he's catching them, okay? If you watch my videos, if you watch me in the tournament, almost every single one of mine there's no open water. It's hay grass, which is way, way more stout than water willow. So you got hay grass and you got bushes. And they're on Neely Henry, where they're talking about a 4-pounder is a big one. Well, I'm not saying I caught a bunch of 4s, but what I'll say is this. My co-angler on day 1 had a 6-pounder for a big bass of all the co-anglers. And on day 3, my co-angler had an 8-pounder, okay? So that was the biggest bass of anyone in the competition, boater or co-angler or whatever. So in my boat, I had big bass basically 2 of the days. Well, I fish all those heavy rods and all that stuff because when I catch an 8-pounder or a 6-pounder, I'm not on stage telling y'all about how I lost that fish. I don't really rig up to catch 2-pounders. I rig up to where I'm prepared for an 8-pounder, but I can still catch a 2-pounder, if that makes sense. So I bring all that up because, yes, a composite rod for throwing a swim jig would be okay in open water conditions, but I was not in open water conditions. I'm throwing around buckbrush and hay and have big fish. So I'm just throwing in a lot heavier, nastier stuff. So that braid and that rod that I'm throwing and everything, you know, I throw a big 300 Lew's Super Duty reel. I do all that for a reason, so I don't lose fish. So I understand, and this isn't a knock on Gerald. What I'm saying is every situation is going to be different. I usually throw fluorocarbon on my swim jigs because I like the give. Same way Swindle was liking the give. You can get give in your rod, in your line, 2 different ways. You can get the give from your rod giving, or you can use certain line that'll give. Well, fluorocarbon is going to give more than braid, and his rod is going to give more than my rod. So you have to figure out the conditions and what you're actually fishing, understand what you're going to throw, like I said. So I normally have it on fluorocarbon because I like the give when they eat it. It's just a different feeling. It hooks them differently. But when I miss some of them, I started realizing that in all that hay and in all that stuff, sometimes they weren't, when I wasn't getting enough penetration, and that braid seemed to catch them a lot easier, better. And I wasn't setting the hook crazy on them. I was kind of leaning into them more. So I kind of adjusted the way I would set the hook. So that was kind of the key, because once I dialed in the bait, And location was key to a degree. I wasn't fishing one spot, I was fishing multiple spots. I just started driving around the lake and looking for it. But just that one key simple bait change, rod and reel change, and like I said, the weights were very close. So when I look at a tournament like this, and this is most tournaments, and we've seen this over years and years of fishing, losing a 4-pounder one day is usually the difference between 10 to 15 spots. So I could have easily have lost one of those fish and not made the cut. And so that's why I think rod selection, reel selection, bait selection, little subtleties sometimes make a difference. And it seemed like, you know, I didn't have a giant on day 2, but I never lost one, and my weight got less. I only had 15 pounds, but I actually moved up to 4th place instead of 6th. And then on the day 3, with the rain delay and everything, I only caught 11-13, and I was happy because I was gonna win Angler of the Year. But I'm like, I'm gonna fall some spots, you know, like I understand, you know. And what's crazy is when we got there, I weighed it in the third largest bag of the day because we didn't have very much time to fish, and I only had 11-13, but I never lost one, right? I made it all count. So that's kind of the juice on Rayburn. That's kind of what I wanted to share with y'all, is how little bitty changes, and understanding from how the fish changed from 10 days before the tournament to literally the day before the tournament. I had it all figured out, I thought, and then that all went away come the day of the tournament. I think I caught 1 fish on a frog, or 2 fish on a frog in 3 days. One was like schooling ones in the morning shad spawn deal, and my last one was the last fish of the entire tournament. And then in between all that, I catch them all on a swim jig that I basically never caught a fish on in practice. But it was just changing with the conditions, and then fishing a swim jig long enough and understanding it to go, hey, there needs to be a small change. Yeah, I caught most of the fish, 95% of the fish, 90% of the fish I caught on a swim jig on day 1. I wanted to try to make it 100. I wanted to make it 100% where I never lost one. And so the next 2 days, I never lost one on a swim jig. So that will make the difference sometimes between a top 10, getting a check, winning an event, Angler of the Year, things like that. Those all matter. So I wanted to share with you all of that. Anyways, hope you all liked all this. That's the juice on Rayburn. See y'all.